has been Business Review, your daily source for the most critical stories in the financial world. Tune in next time for the latest financial news impacting the world economy.
France officially approved this week the end of the CFA franc, which should henceforth be called the ECO, but without renouncing its financial commitment to Africa at a time when the continent is hit by the coronavirus. This change comes at a time when France is pleading internationally for support to African countries, which are suffering the full brunt of the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus.
La France a finalement cédé à une pression qui vient de l'Afrique.
West African nations have demanded to renew this currency, and after this pressure, France led the way to change. But this is not the end of the CFA. In fact, it's only the reform of the financial system. But the problem is that the end is not a history change. In fact, we are still at the beginning. We will still be guaranteed by France financially.
This symbolic end was to be part of a renewal of the relationship between France and Africa. In addition to failing oil and commodity prices, Africa is also facing mistrust from investors who are falling back on safer markets. Since the start of the crisis, Paris has also been very active in the G20 and in particular obtained a moratorium on the payment of debt service this year for the 77 poorest countries a month ago.
It's a very important question. It's the question of the debt release. It's not a new debate, of course, at the international level, but we understand that in the current circumstances, because of the COVID-19 and because of the potential very huge effects at the economic level of the COVID-19 everywhere in the world, but also in Africa, I think that there is a legitimate question: how is it possible to support the African countries by opening this political debate about the debt relief?
Paris is withdrawing from the governance bodies in which it was present. The CFA franc, which stands for Financial Community in Africa, is a common currency of 8 member states, and it's planned to be replaced by the ECO in July 2020, the future common currency of Africa. Currently, €1 is equal to 655 CFA.
This is Farah Al-Hashim reporting for the Business Review, KTV2 News, Paris.
Executives said Maryland's decision to reopen non-essential businesses came just in time for high-end guitar maker PRS Guitars, which kept 374 workers on its payroll during an 8-week shutdown that has gouged a deep hole in revenues. About 90 PRS employees came back to a very different workplace, their workstations spaced 6 feet apart, with one-way traffic lanes drawn on the factory floor and a 55-gallon drum of hand sanitizer on hand. To enter the facility near Chipesky B in the eastern part of the state, each had to have a temperature check, and every time a hand sanded and finished guitar changes hands, it must now be carefully sanitized, and that's a lot of sanitizing considering each guitar receives some 20 hours of hand labor. The stories of PRS and its phased return to work is being replicated all over the United States as more firms resume operations after strict closure measures. Founder Paul Reed-Smith said the company took on millions of dollars in debt to keep paying workers and ensure production could resume when the lockdown ended. So the company sprang into action, selling nearly all its existing inventory, applying for and receiving a federal Small Business Administration loan, and working with retailers to help them boost online sales. The third largest electric guitar maker in the United States, PRS has the loyal support of some of the biggest names in the music business, including Carlos Santana, who's been playing Smith's guitars since 1980, and John Mayer. But it must be able to build guitars to pay its bills, and even though work resumed this week, it will be months before full production levels are reached. Sales have expanded robustly in recent years, but the shutdown has derailed capital investment plans and knocked a hole in revenues that will be impossible to fill this year. Sales hit $66.5 million in 2019, and had been slated to rise 12% in 2020. Relief for PRS came from Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, and he announced a phased reopening, giving PRS the go-ahead to resume production. Some workers will now shift to evenings to reduce the number of people in the factory at one time, and the souvenir shop has been transformed into a lunchroom since Maryland restrictions still forbid more than 10 people in one room at a time. The chief operating officer said that the way PRS will market its guitars this year has changed, with Big Summer trade show already called off and the fate of the key winter show still uncertain. He said that northern China region, where PRS has some acoustic guitars built, was not significantly affected by the lockdowns, and online guitar sales are up, giving PRS a 6-month backlog, which is its largest ever.
Shopping malls and restaurants in Bangkok, Thailand, reopened after about a month of being locked down due to the COVID-19 outbreak. The Thai government announced earlier the closing of all shopping malls to curb the spread of the virus, while in recent days, a days of zero growth of number of confirmed cases shows the great easing of the epidemic and the government deciding to gradually limit its restrictions on people's movements. It was announced that shopping malls and restaurants are among the businesses covered by the Phase 2 COVID-19 lockdown and were allowed to reopen, and curfew hours will be shortened by 1 hour to start at 11 p.m. The government first took small steps in easing health control measures with the first round of relaxation and reopening of small premises on May 3rd. To ensure the health of customers, shopping centers allowed to reopen adopted various measures like real name registration at entrance through scanning a QR code, which can help the center track these customers after they enter. If something related to the epidemic happens, they can easily be found. Moreover, keeping social distancing, wrapping up fresh and dry fruits for sale, and controlling the number of visitors in one store are also required in the center.
Many small business owners have seen their American dreams shattered and have had to fire and furlough lifetime employees amid the COVID-19 pandemic in the US. With the pandemic spreading across the country at an alarming rate, small business owners were forced to shut down shops due to the lockdown. Eduardo Betancourt, co-owner of Adara by Carol B, co-founded his business 3 years ago. The company produces and distributes lingerie and bathing suits made in Colombia, and the main point of sale is in Miami. Once the pandemic hit South Florida, all retail stores had to close. Betancourt said that he had been a very challenging time for him and his family, especially at the beginning of the outbreak, as worry and stress crept in amid the uncertainties of his business as well as the health crisis in the country. However, despite U.S. President Donald Trump pushing to reopen the economy as soon as possible, he added the uncertainties will not go away and business will not be back the same as before for a long time. More than 1 million people have applied for unemployment benefits in Florida since the pandemic hit, overwhelming the state system. A majority of those claimants have yet to be paid.
Only 10 to 15% of workers are expected to go back to their offices situated in the glass towers of the French business district La Défense, despite the government easing lockdown measures. Known for its skyscrapers and its arc, the area gathers 500 companies. Before the lockdown imposed by France to fight the coronavirus pandemic 2 months ago, 180,000 employees used to come every day at one of Europe's biggest business areas. But since the lockdown was imposed on March 17th, La Défense has largely been deserted as many finance workers continued working from home. Around 98.5% of employees estimated. Marie-Kelly Golliam, the head of the state agency Paris La Défense, which manages the district's public spaces. 29 years old Amin Ben Abdel Ali is one of them. This worker in data security only made the trip from home today to pick up some equipment to continue to be able to work from home. France tiptoed out of one of Europe's strictest coronavirus lockdowns, allowing non-essential shops factories and other businesses to reopen for the first time in 8 weeks, as the risks of a second wave of infections loomed large.
A Paris commercial court ruled that insurer AXA must pay a restaurant owner 2 months' worth of virus-related revenue losses, possibly opening the door to a wave of similar litigation. AXA said it would appeal. It said there was a difference in interpretation over a specific type of contract signed by several hundred restaurant businesses with a single brokerage. Stéphane Manigault, who runs 4 restaurants in Paris, was one of them. He filed a lawsuit requiring AXA to cover his operating losses after a government order in mid-March to close bars and restaurants to try to slow the spread of the virus. The ruling will be watched closely by restaurants, cafes, and nightclubs in Britain and the United States, which are also threatening legal action against insurers who've not paid out on business interruption policies. The court said the administrative decision to close the restaurant qualified for insurance cover as business interruption loss. AXA has a 13% market share among French craftsmen and merchants, and it said it had in its portfolio only 200 contracts with French businesses in various sectors that provide business interruption guarantees where there's no physical damage involved. AXA said it was in the process of compensating those 200. Insurers argue the pandemic risk is excluded from operating loss insurance guarantees because it's not insurable. French insurers would otherwise have to compensate 20 billion euros per month for operating losses due to the lockdown.